courses, I'm considered certified.
You can use
He feels it's irrelevant. I don't know. I'm sure he can explain it.
He tried to call me.
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah, that was a topic of conversation with some friends. Liz
I guess, should we just get the show on the
happy
ground?
about this, or should you wish you were out of the house?
She's gonna be like, I can't just drink by myself on Tuesday nights
Find something to
anymore.
do, Mike.
Exactly.
Now it's time to take a break.
Yeah,
I'll probably do something again in the future.
I will as well. Like I can come back to this in the future when I'm like not still trying to get a paycheck and
It'll still be there.
have children.
It'll still be there.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes, it will.
What's the sign say? Oh,
We're just waiting.
Okay. He was here a second
He
ago.
was here.
No, but I mean,
Oh, I don't know. Well, you can move over the
I'm where
chairs.
my sign is. So
Yeah, you can move over the chairs. If there's too many, Bruce will just move that away. You don't need all
maybe I'll
that.
just do that. It's very
Yeah,
tight.
yeah. I mean, he can sit here, he can sit there. I don't care.
I don't really care.
Doesn't matter.
You're
One
in
kind
the
of
front
open
watching
space.
squirming all the time.
I just need an area.
I know. And a chair for my bags.
I guess I always have it has to be on my right, not my left.
Oh my
I
gosh,
have
that's funny.
to have to have it left. I mean, I could do it there, but I'd rather have it here.
Could write a funny op-ed about the foibles of Board of Ed members and
It's like riding on a train. I have to go this way versus
We're
that
waiting
way.
for you, Bruce.
I don't know what that is. Should be. So I don't know why that seems tricky to me, but
Just tell me before I start.
I wish we could do it.
Yes?
It looks good.
It looks good. Okay. It is 7:10, and I am going to call the September workshop of the Board of Education to order, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will, because this is a workshop, we will go immediately to our work session, which tonight is on high school start time, the committee's report and recommendations. Subsequently, we will have public comments on just that workshop topic for anyone who would like to speak. So I will turn the floor over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, I just wanted to introduce someone to the board. You're aware that last year we had Zakia Parrish with us from New Haven, who was doing her superintendent internship here. I'm very pleased to have a new intern. I wanted to introduce him to you tonight, Matt Brown. Matt, could you stand? Matt is the leader of the high school in the community in New Haven. He's in a very unique position because this school is a collaboration between the New Haven AFT and the Board of Education. It's a co-jointly run school. And he reports to both the president of the AFT and the superintendent. Prior to that, he was the founding principal and designer of an expeditionary learning school, Outward Bound School in New York City. He and his wife spent 2 years in the Peace Corps as a volunteer in Southern Africa, and began his career as a Teach for America corpsman in Los Angeles, California. He holds a undergraduate from St. Lawrence and a master's degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So you'll be seeing him from time to time and throughout the district as he completes his 120-hour internship. And Matt, it's really great to have you with us in Norwalk. Yeah. So this is the long-awaited report and recommendations of our school start time committee on an extremely important health and welfare issue for adolescent students. Brenda, can you be changing the slides? So you have in front of you a set of slides. We have them going up there for the public. This began in the last school year when the Board of Education set a goal for the district. As you know, we have priority outcomes, we have priority implementation steps that implement our strategic operating plan. And the board set this priority implementation step to conduct a study and develop plans to address findings of the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Center for Disease Control concerning later high school start times. And it was with to fulfill that goal that the school start time committee was organized. I was honored to serve as its conveners. And I'm equally honored to introduce the members tonight who have really done yeoman's work and did such a dedicated job relative to exploring this issue. And, you know, they also did a good job balancing this with feasibility and cost, but to achieve the goal for our students. I'm pleased to introduce Jacqueline Ahrens, who's the assistant principal at, Jackie, would you please stand? When I introduce you, if you could just stand and remain standing. Dr. Sasha Carr is a Silvermine Elementary parent, also a psychologist and sleep coach. Dr. Frank Costanzo, you know, our MPS Chief of School Operations. April Gilboa, Norwalk High School parent, also representing the Norwalk High School Governance Council. Maureen Ireland, Norwalk High School Math Department Chair. Rob Carl, a Norwalk High School teacher. Heidi Keys served as board liaison to this group. You're the only one that I can't tell to stand up. But, James McDonald. James is a Brian McMahon High School parent and also represented the School Governance Council when the committee was formed. Joseph Mataferri, Brian McMahon High School Athletic Director, and also notably the 2018-19 State Athletic Director of the Year and National Athletic Director of the Year. Joanne Malinowski, our NPS nurse coordinator. Dr. Jennifer Masson, Wolf Pit Elementary School principal. Jimmy Napoli, Norwalk High School parent and representative of the NHS School Governance Council. Tanika Vellucci, Brian McMahon High School teacher. Brenda Wilcox-Williams, our communication officer. Joanne Zanvetter, the transportation coordinator. Justin Zarega, Dr. Justin Zarega, Brian McMahon High School Special Ed Department Chair. And then we had Tom Platt and Griffin Scott from School Bus Consultants that served to do a lot of the routing work on the committee's behalf. I want to thank all of you for an excellent job that resulted in this very important report tonight. Thank you. The committee was given the following charge that appears on page 4 of your slides. That was to, and you know, this effort started, the goal really was set in response to what was becoming a deluge of evidence and writing and research on this topic and how it was affecting adolescents. You know, but we had not had a systematic review of the research. So that was part of the committee's charge, was to review and distill the medical and psychological research and evidence on student well-being as it related to high school start times. Also to determine the impact and potential solutions concerning athletics, after-school activities, and childcare. To survey parents and high school students concerning aspects of changing school start times. And they were asked also to have at least one focus group of students and one of parents. It turns out, I believe, there were 3 of parents and 2 focus groups of students. Review relevant district contracts to determine any the potential financial impact of changing school start times. They did that with various models. Develop with the assistance of school bus consultants a cost-neutral solution for school start time adjustments and a preferred solution. We will get to that, I think, later in the committee's report. Keep stakeholders, parents, students, and staff appraised of the committee's work and pending recommendations. I think each member of the group performed that role for their respective groups, parents to parents, teachers to teachers, administrators to administrators. And then make specific recommendations to the Board of Education regarding school start time adjustments, including implementation and or transportation and timing of implementation. So with that as introduction, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Sasha Carr, who is going to review the research review with you. Dr. Carr.
Thanks. So what I do for a living is I help families get better sleep for their children. That's what I do during my working hours. And so this is a topic very near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've been aware of since I was in graduate school over 20 years ago, because there is a body of research supporting these ideas that is decades old. It's not something that's new or coming out of the blue. We know that teens are sleep deprived. The majority of high school students get far less sleep than what's recommended by the medical community. And sleep deprivation in teens is associated with greater risk for anxiety, depression, substance abuse, accidents like car accidents, and suicide. And that relationship has been demonstrated over and over again in controlled studies where we've been able to control for other factors that might be contributing to this, because of course it's not just sleep that is involved in what we're seeing in teens. But I can tell you that having been to multiple conferences on this topic, the folks who are studying this in public health will say that they're the envy of their professional colleagues who are studying other areas. So people who are looking at things like nutrition and exercise and their effect on health will say, gosh, I wish that the evidence were so clear and compelling for my field as it is for this one. So I mentioned I'm a family sleep coach and I talk to parents a lot. I spend a lot of time kind of helping them be the bad guy and setting limits and structure with their children, lots of expectations, enforcing things like a good bedtime, a healthy bedtime. I'm a psychologist, so I really focus on behavior. But I can tell you that when parents of teens ask me, what is the one thing that I can do that is most going to benefit my teen? If they have an early start time, I will tell those parents. And meanwhile, I'm telling them all these other rules that the kids have to follow, but I say, do whatever you can to let them sleep in, because that is going to make a huge difference. Now, of course, my clients tend to be fairly privileged. They have the cash to pay me, so they can take a lot of measures to help their teens sleep in, like driving them to school. I have a few clients who actually moved their children to schools with later times because they could. That's not a luxury that everybody has. So I would really like to see teens going to school later, and this is the main reason why. A lot, like people who first hear about this topic say, why don't you just have them go to bed sooner? Like that will solve it, or make them get off their phones and go to bed. But we know that at puberty, there's a hormonal change that literally shifts teens' body clocks 2 to 3 hours later. So what does that mean? That means that you can send a teen to bed at 9 o'clock, but it is going to be extremely difficult for that teenager to fall asleep. Now, this is the average teenager. There's going to be teenagers on the planet who can fall asleep at night. But most can't, no matter what they do. They'll lie there awake. This shift to a later circadian rhythm, it's a universal biological phenomenon, and it's completely separate from behaviors like technology use. So I'm the first person to police things like technology use. If you are lying in bed with your phone, that's going to keep you awake, that's for sure. But we know that teens will fall asleep later and have trouble falling asleep, even if, like studies have been done, even if they live in a non-industrial culture where they don't even have light bulbs, much less smartphones. They stay up later. We actually see this in different animal populations too. And I won't get into it too much, but I think it's kind of cool. Like there's some theories that it's an evolutionary reason, like with social groups, with monkeys and primates. If you have teens who are basically almost adult size, who are staying up while everybody else falls asleep, they can actually help protect the group. So anyway, it's something that we see that's unrelated to behavior. And when we wake teens prior to 7:30, we're usually depriving them of at least one REM sleep cycle per night. Why is that important? We know that REM sleep occurs more frequently in the early morning hours, and that's the type of sleep that's responsible for sort of mental restoration, so memory, learning, brain development, because teens' brains are still developing. All of these things are more dependent on getting sleep in the early morning than in the first half of the night. And even when we force teens to get themselves up and into school, because that's what we do, their hormonal balance in the early morning is going to leave their brains unreceptive to learning. So yeah, they're up and they're at school, but their brain is actually still releasing melatonin, the sleep hormone. So having them learn at 8:30 is like asking a grade schooler to learn at 5:30 or at 9 o'clock at night, I guess. That's one of the things that I would compare it to. So because of all that, because we know that teens aren't getting enough sleep, and earlier bedtime and other behavioral measures are not going to solve the problem because of this circadian shift, that's why health experts from pretty much every corner are recommending that high school start times be later. So if we were going to make this change, one of the things that we would really, really want to be sure of is if we move the times later, is that actually going to help? Is that actually going to work? And one of the biggest questions that I get is, so you let them go to school later, they wake up later, they're just going to stay up later. Fortunately, we've actually seen in multiple studies that when a later time is implemented and teens can wake up later, they tend to go to bed around the same time, so they actually get a gain in their night's sleep. And a recent study from Seattle even went so far as to put monitors on the kids. So it wasn't them reporting when they went to bed, it was actually measuring when they fell asleep and when they woke up, and they showed that they actually got a gain in sleep. So we know that if we make this change, that our high schoolers will get more sleep. And in turn, we know that if they get more sleep because we made this change, then we are likely to see improvements in things like attendance, tardiness, which is not in there, but being to school on time, standardized testing, and academic performance. And we're likely to see a reduction in things like substance abuse, depression, caffeine consumption, and car accidents, which I mentioned before. So obviously a change like this is going to cost money. I think it's interesting to note that economists have actually looked at shifting start times later as a cost-saving measure for some communities. And they just looked at academic performance and accident rates alone and found a significant return on investment for making that change. And that's not looking at all of those other things I mentioned, like substance abuse and depression. If you've got high schoolers abusing drugs, depressed, anxious, likely to commit suicide, that's going to lead to costs as well. And what does it cost the Norwalk community to place our teens at higher risk for all of these negative factors? And what would it potentially save to close some of that achievement gap and increase academic performance? Because we know from the research as well that if we make this change, it's likely that there's an increased benefit to disadvantaged students. We've seen this. So in that recent study in Seattle that I mentioned, the incidence of both absences and tardiness in the economically disadvantaged school, they studied 2 different high schools, dropped to the same, much lower level as were those in the more advantaged school. So kids who are at a disadvantage actually benefit more from this kind of change. In North Carolina, increases in the standardized test scores were significantly higher among disadvantaged students. Now, everyone improved in their test scores, but there was a much bigger difference in students who were considered disadvantaged. So I've heard before that this kind of change is viewed as a luxury, but I think it could potentially be an effective cost-saving measure in terms of helping close the achievement gap, which I know is a big goal for Norwalk. So I will turn it over to Joanne. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening. I wanted to just bring to your attention the letter that is endorsed by our pediatricians. The first line and the most poignant piece of this public health epidemic needs to be taken as seriously as any other health issue, which is very, very important in this respect. The other thing I'd like to say is Dr. Weinberger came to one of our meetings in January, and I recall him saying, "What took you so long to think about doing this?" Well, obviously, logistics and money. So, as you know, the committee has worked very diligently to understand all angles in this topic. And as Dr. Carr discussed, the research is clear when it comes to the health and wellness of our students. It is with great enthusiasm that I present this letter of endorsement by our pediatric practices regarding healthier school start times. Our school medical advisor, Dr. Weinberger, met with the committee during a regular meeting and conveyed his strong support for a change to high school start times. As a result of that, to understand how other local practitioners felt about the topic, I reached out to all our local Norwalk pediatric practices with a very short packet of information explaining the reason for the anticipated changes. Every practice was already well aware of the scientific research and its validity. They were extremely willing to support this initiative, and as a result, the letter you see here has been signed by every pediatric practice in Norwalk. I must say, as a nurse for 43 years and 26 years in this district, this is really a long time coming. And having been in a school for 21 years, I can attest to the fact that students do come to school sleepy, and they would come to the school nurse to rest right in the first period of school. It's very important that we look at this and that we really take this as an initiative that needs to be dealt with and that we move on to the next step. I'd also like to thank the committee for all their hard work and expertise, and I honestly have never worked with a nicer, more involved group of people who are totally invested in striving to promote the health and wellness of our students and make a positive impact on the community at large. Thank you, Dr. Adamowski. I would like to turn this over to Jackie Ahrens and Jim McDonald. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So Mr. McDonald and I are going to present some of the literature, some of the activities, and the meetings that we held to kind of bring this whole process together and recommend a final report. Okay, so essentially we began with a review of the literature, and as you've already heard from our different speakers tonight, there's a lot of research. So we went through that research, the research about mental health, the research about circadian rhythms, the research about what other districts have done. So we spent a lot of time reading and a lot of time discussing what that impact on our students would be and what that impact on our district would be. So really rich conversations, lots of things that we had to think about in order to complete this report. The articles, as you can see, scanning this list, they span those topics. In addition to the articles that we read, we also held a host of meetings with a variety of subject matter experts. As you have already heard, Dr. Weinberger And also, we've had meetings with the athletic director, Mr. Mataferri, as well as our 4 high school principals, as well as public works, because we had to think about everything, not only what this impact would be on the schedule, but in the town, what would happen with traffic patterns, and so on and so forth, in addition to transportation consultants. So it was a very thorough and detailed research that we performed. In addition, we started to think about the input of the community, and we created surveys that would give us input from how our local stakeholders would feel about these changes and what made them most concerned about it. And the survey took a moment to come together as well, and the committee gave lots of input on the questions that would be asked, as well as making sure that we could offer a variety of viewpoints. We surveyed, I'm gonna go back for a second. We've surveyed families at all levels, not just the high school level, and we also surveyed the students as well. So Mr. McDonald is gonna present some of that data that we received back, and then we'll talk a little bit about the focus groups.
I'm just going to make a couple of summary comments about some of these because they're pretty self-explanatory, and I know people don't like to be read to. So what I'd call out on this one, the wake-up times, they seem pretty obvious and evident. One of the conversations I remember having at one of the schools involved out-of-district kids. So I just want to note the obvious that we both take in and send out kids out of district. And some of those kids, to get to public transportation, trains, vans, etc., get up at inordinately early hours. So next one, please. Parent and guardian responses to bedtimes in Norwalk. They run the gamut, as you see, from before 7:30, but again, these are children in all grade levels, not just high schoolers, to the 1 o'clock or later. And I can tell you that my household, unfortunately, would be one of the 14 respondents in the 1 a.m. or later. But the bulk are clearly earlier, but again skewed across the K to the 12 range. And then kindergarten, hours of sleep in Norwalk. Here, the bulk of kids, I would say, if we were looking for kids to ideally have 8 or 9 hours of sleep, you see how many that would encompass, but look at the huge numbers in 9 to 10, whatever. Those are dream numbers for most of the older kids who don't get anywhere near that. And then the next one, this is a split basically of 3 to 2, just asking parents on high school children whether they get enough sleep, and the answers are, the yeses are 3 to 2. And then finally, high school student responses here on school night, what time they typically get to sleep. About 40% of the kids would be before 11 o'clock, and the remaining 60% are all after 11 p.m. at night. And student responses. So on a school day, what time do you get up? So the 6 o'clock and earlier is about 55% of the total, and 45% are after the 6:30 time. And then finally, student responses on how many hours of sleep they normally get on a school night. And there you see all over the map from less than 5 to as much as 10. So an incredibly wide range. And then finally, how often are you tardy or late to school? You see there you have almost an even split between those, half of whom say pretty much never, and then all the other categories from a few times to most days are the other half. And we know about tardiness and something that we're paying attention to, so there's clearly a tie-in with sleep time there as well. And then the final, how often do you stay for school activities? So never and sometimes is about 46% of the total, and 54% are often or always. So Jackie, back to you.
Can I may have missed it, that last group of 492 students, how old were they? Just high school?
Yeah.
That's right, thank you.
Yeah. You have to differentiate between the K-12 and the high school. We surveyed kids directly, which were high schoolers only,
We surveyed the parents
and the parents of K-12.
all K-12, and then we also actually had the high school students do the survey.
Julie?
Also, I'm wondering, this may be different than from when I was in high school, but do you also have any survey response on how often students come early for activities and meetings? Does that happen in Norwalk or not?
Does it happen? Yes.
I was like, 'cause I used to have 7 a.m. meetings all the
Yes,
time.
It does happen for a variety of reasons, whether it's a practice or an open gym, or it could be a study group, it could be student leadership. They meet in the morning sometimes, so yes, they do come before school.
Okay, but do we have data
Do
on
we
that?
have the data across the district? I don't think it's something that we.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be a very small group, given the 7:30 start time.
Okay.
And also, students would be dependent on getting to the bus, for school. So, if they're waiting for the bus at 6:30, 6:45, they're not going to get there before 7:30.
Thank you.
So in addition to the surveys, we also held focus groups in which the families could come and talk and give us some input about what their concerns were, and also about how they felt about the school start times. And as you can see, there was a lot of warm feedback. They were in support of the medical research, and this happened at both the high school sessions and the elementary sessions. And they agree that high school students need more sleep. And they really like the idea of engaging the parents into this discussion. Some of the cool food feedback, which we really have to work with a little bit in terms of educating the community and how we're gonna deal with these things, is, the impact on sports. Huge for the students' response too. Also, sure, a loss of class time for the athletes who might miss their last period class for an away game. After-school care for younger siblings of students who are in the high school who watch their younger siblings. It could also mean the inability to have a job after school because of the time that they're getting out of school. So there were some concerns that were presented, as well as some agreement with, yes, high schoolers need more sleep, and yes, we see what the medical research has presented to us. Very similar findings at the elementary family session, and understanding the support for the academic and emotional benefits of high school kids. Positive for families that already use before care. Cold feedback, some of it was more about concern for what do we do for after-school care, especially if we rely on our older student to watch our younger student. Some of the possibilities that came up had to deal with the logistics of transportation, and if we would do different things to make sure that we could accommodate for the earlier start times at all the different levels, which some of them may not happen. So, and we were in the beginning stages of this at that point. And the students, it was very similar to that last pie chart that we looked at. Yeah, they could use more sleep, and they said it. They were concerned about some things like, how am I gonna get my homework done? If I have my athletics later, and then I have my homework, how am I gonna get all that done? They were also concerned about the after-school activities, band, jobs, like how am I gonna get all this stuff done? What time is it going to be? But they also acknowledged that they need more rest, and that they felt like a later start time would benefit them. So at this point, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Costanzo, who's going to talk about the models that we studied in coming up with this final report.
Before, Doctor, I do have a question that keeps coming up, and perhaps Mr. Matafari can answer it. You alluded to it. Exactly how often would high school students be pulled out? It's in the report, but I think it's something that should be clarified for the public.
It'll vary on the season. Yes, they will be pulled out, but the percentage is not high, and mainly sub-varsity, not varsity. Right now in our league, there's 2 other schools that do have a change time, which is one in Greenwich, and we do accommodate for their games, and it could be moved around. You will take kids out of class, because some schools will not be able to because their facilities don't have lights. But based on what season, will depend on how many kids are taken out of class early to catch a 2:30 bus to play a 4 o'clock game. We're in a great location in Fairfield County, but still, you're going to definitely have to take them out. It's minimal, but you will take them out.
Just to, I'm sorry,
Go ahead,
I just want to contribute to that answer. To give you an overview of this, and this was surprising to some, but we have approximately 30% of our students that are participating in athletics now. That's divided over 3 seasons. So in any given season, it's roughly 10%. And then you have to divide, as Mr. Manaferi said, the home games and the practices would be, would not be a problem because they would occur here after school. And even in the dead of winter, we have lighted fields and so on. So now we're down to the away games, right? That would be, some of those would be played with the 2 districts around us that already have switch times. And then the others we would have to release early for. We're down to, at that point, about 2% of the student body at any given time. And I think when the committee looked at this in terms of frequency, it was leaving early about once every 3 weeks from a class.
Based on the team.
Based on the team.
Based on the team.
I thought, to follow up on this, I thought one of the solutions kind of Greenwich had implemented that you could alter that block schedule in high school and that there would be the
Flex
last period
Flex
that
period.
was
Yeah.
not a class block, but was,
Opportunity.
whatever,
That's what-
elective, whatever, and so you weren't really gonna miss a class. I thought that was a route we
Yeah,
were thinking of
that's like a
going.
flex
So-
for the last period, but Greenwich's biggest problem is they're coming they're the
So
southern school in the league, and their away games, they're going north, and they're hitting traffic continuously.
So about halfway through our process, following the panel discussion that we had with the 4 principals, I think the committee made a decision that the scheduling of this should be left up to the principal and SGC of each school. So that kind of schedule is open to our schools, where you would shorten up the other periods by a few minutes each, and then you'd have this 45-minute block at the end of the day, which essentially would be a choice period, athletics, band, elective courses that might be a semester course but would run all year because of the 45 minutes. So that is an option. We had comments by the principal of Center for Global Studies who wanted to do something like that at noontime and had different ideas on this. Similarly, the Norwalk PTAC wanted to align more closely with the college schedule in the afternoon. So one of the reasons why we need a year's lead time for this is that schools may want to make scheduling changes. And if they don't, then we will have this very small number of students miss a class or leave early on their last class every 3 weeks or so.
Exactly. Anything else?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joe, Jacqueline, and Jim. Before I begin talking about the recommendation, a quick historical tidbit that I think you'll find interesting. As we went about this resolution, I learned and described to the committee that, it's interesting that we would be a pioneer in this work of later high school start times and adjusting our transportation accordingly. The first automobile that was on the public payroll for a public school district in Connecticut was Norwalk. And that was in 1913, long before any other district was providing transportation to its students. So ironically, here we are, more than 100 years later, doing more pioneer work. So the model analysis that you see here was extensive. We relied heavily on school bus consultants to take us through close to 24 different start time models that were generated through their computer models. And one that rose quickly to a level of interest for the committee was the Denver model. Now, Denver Public Schools has 12 high schools, and they run on what they call a flex schedule, which runs from 7:30 in the morning until 4:15 in the afternoon. Much more similar to your college model. High school students and families, depending upon their interest, determine what their day is like. And so Some are early birds, and they like to get those courses underway in earnest at 7:30, while others look to start the day later and end the day later in the afternoon. So we found this very interesting. In one of our panels, we brought the high school principals of P-TECH, CGS, Norwalk High School, and together to hear about the Denver model and some of these other models. And there are some limitations to it. For one, the Denver model is really dependent upon public transportation. They switched from the yellow bus system to a regional transportation district. The Denver model is based upon interest level. So they run courses based upon the percentage of students who are signing up for courses at various points in the day. We love the idea, but thought it would be a challenge for the current infrastructure that we have here in Norwalk. We looked at 4 options that focused on start times that range anywhere from 8:50 to 9:15 in the morning. And the metrics that we studied included bell times, the peak AM deployment in the bus tier system, the peak PM deployment, as well as looking at each of our 3 bus tiers. Norwalk currently operates on a 3-tiered bus system. Another metric we looked at was the total transportation window, which ranged in these models from 5 hours and 45 minutes to 6 hours. And this is literally the amount of time that buses are rolling on the road throughout the course of any given school day. And what we'll talk about in just a short while is the model that we arrived at.
Right.
But it's, yes, Mr.
Is there any
Kimmel.
discussion of the cost of the Denver model using, in the city size of Norwalk, using school buses?
We didn't get far enough to cost out the flex schedule. The closest thing we got to that model was to start the high school day at 8:45, which was closer to the recommendation that most of our medical experts believe to be, which is 9 a.m. But the day would still end at the same time for every school and for every student. So it wasn't quite a flex model, but that model ran approximately $1.9 million. And so we removed that from our options because it was cost prohibitive, and the board had really given us a charge to keep this below $700,000. Still, the model that we ultimately chose, I think, is really a good one. It includes, and we're going to get to this in a minute, but elementary schools starting at 3 different possible times in the morning, a consistent middle school start time, and a high school start time, which we'll talk about momentarily. Increased costs, the committee determined, was really a factor that constrained our ability to be innovative. We ultimately chose a model that increased our total bus fleet from 66 buses to 71 buses. Now keep in mind, to run a school bus in Norwalk this year, it cost us approximately $86,600 per bus. When we ran these assumptions, we based it on potential cost increases. As you know, we are going out to bid in the winter for a new transportation vendor. So we built in a $90,000 per bus cost factor when running these assumptions. And I think I've covered everything here. The highlight or the silver lining of this report tonight is to tell you that based upon all of the impacts and alternatives that we considered, including cost, the Start Time Committee is recommending shifting the high school start time to 8:30 from 7:30 a.m. So this is a full hour later in the morning. We think it makes good sense to stop here for reasons that include cost implications, for the pressures that this would put, the fewer pressures this would put on afternoon activities and athletics. 8:30 we began to see as the sweet spot in many respects for the ultimate recommendation on the high school start time. Now obviously high schools are not the only communities that we're considering. And when we did school focus groups and family focus groups and met with students, we made it a point to reach out to other levels of the school system, including elementary and middle. And what you've already heard is that the biggest issue for elementary families was that they didn't want their little ones out at the bus stop before the sun came up. And so we made a commitment as a committee that any final model that we put forward before the board would begin at, would start with elementaries beginning of the day no earlier than 8 a.m. And that, for us, protects this, this most important point that elementary families continue to make. So our little ones will be out at bus stops with the sun up in all cases. So what you have here in front of you are is a grid with two different columns. The first one is the 1920 schedule, and to the right is the recommendation that we're making for you tonight. And the metrics here are the bell times and the different school groups. The 1920 schedule reflects a couple of things before we talk about the tiers and the schedule. Perhaps most importantly, this now reflects the full phase-in of the additional 30 minutes to the elementary school day that we've been working on for the past 2+ years. You might remember that the Norwalk Elementary School, per the contract, had one of the shortest elementary school days in the state at 6 hours and 5 minutes. This new schedule factors in a 6-hour, 35-minute elementary school day, which was phased in over 2 years. We did 6 elementary schools in 18-19, and the remaining 6 went in for this year in 19-20. NECC would run from 9 to 3:30, and then we have the elementaries starting anywhere from between 8:15, as early as 8:15, to as late as 9:05. In the instance of an 8:15 start time for an elementary school, that day obviously is 2:50. The middle elementary, 8:50 to 3:25, and you can see we have 5 late schools that begin at 9:05 and end at 3:40. Middle schools start at 8:15 and end at 2:50, and the high schools will finish after final year, provided the board moves forward with this recommendation, about a final year at 7:30 a.m. to 2:15 p.m. You can see below that the elementary schools are grouped according to those different times. If you slide over to the right, you will see that very little changes outside of the high school start time, which was another goal for the committee. Elementary schools do not start, no elementary school starts before 8 a.m. You can see that 8, 8:50, and 9:15 are the new start times for the 3 elementary groups. That's 10 minutes later in the last instance. And in those situations, that elementary group lets out at 3:50. Middle schools will run identical to the way that they run currently. 8:15 a.m. to 2:50 p.m. And it makes the most sense, based upon the research you heard from Dr. Carr, that the middle schools start in the middle at 8:15. And then lastly, you can see here that the high schools will run from 8:30 to 3:15. So we're going to move to implementation, but are there any questions on the bell time schedules or the recommendation for the high school start time?
It's not a question, but it's just something, you mentioned the placeholder amount of 732,000, and we're not wanting you to come in over that. But in the report itself, there is a $457,000 price tag contingent on a new contract. Do you have anything to say about that? We were pleased to see it was less than we thought it would be.
Based upon the recommendation of the school bus consultant, they believe that in this model, we would be adding approximately 5 school buses. And so at this stage, based upon our assumptions for what school buses will cost in the next contract, we're confident that we will come in under $500,000 and pull off this recommendation.
And you're confident, you have confidence in the analysis that concluded we would only need 5 buses?
Yes.
So I think the committee, after dealing with a number of scenarios that range from 1.3 million to 800,000. I mean, this was kind of a sigh of relief moment when we kept working on it, and found that it would be possible for about 450,000, which we think is a very reasonable cost given the health implications of this, and very different, as you know, from what was experienced in Greenwich and in some other communities throughout the state.
Hi, Julie.
Thanks. So does this, from what I can tell, it looks like this also, the proposed schedule or the recommended schedule may also help alleviate some of the traffic issues that we currently experience. I know notably with Nathan Hale, Norwalk High, and Naramaki, since all three of those schools were, most notably the elementary and middle. Was that taken into consideration, or is that just an additional bonus that they'll now be 15 minutes apart as opposed to starting
I think it's
at the
probably
same time?
safer to say that we don't expect traffic would be any worse.
Okay.
I don't think that this recommendation is positing that traffic would be any better.
Okay.
We did bring our traffic colleagues from the city to one, we had them present at one of our committee meetings to give us their best interpretation of what to expect based upon, at that point, I think we might have been down to 3 options.
Okay.
So we presented them with the 3 options.
There was some concern regarding the mall, which is why we invited the traffic planners in. They pointed out that there are no schools near the mall, and the mall wouldn't be opening until 10 a.m. Anyway, so they didn't see any effect with the mall. They did tell us that unlike Greenwich, where most of the traffic is on Route 1, given the location of their high school, that they didn't feel that this would contribute or alleviate traffic. So I think we're assuming a neutral traffic situation.
I mean, in theory, it seems that the recommended schedule would actually help some of the issues. I know some parents also struggle with drop-offs when kids are in elementary and middle school and the schools are starting at the same time, but based on what I'm seeing here, you actually don't have the middle school starting at the same time as the elementaries. Or
yeah, so that was discussed quite a bit. We don't know, we won't know that until it actually occurs, whether or not that is balanced by more parents dropping their children off because they're dropping them off on their way to work versus taking the bus. We don't know.
Okay.
I should add one final point. When you look at the grid, we did our best to not change the times for current elementary families. So you'll notice that the elementary school groups, in all cases, are starting and ending at just about the same time that they did prior to the implementation of the change, minus Kendall, which is changing to an 8 to 4 day. But outside of Kendall, you can see that the schools will maintain a fairly consistent start and end time. And that was important to elementary parents at the focus group. There were some parents at the elementary focus group that were concerned about getting flipped by as much as an hour. So that was also...
and I think we could mention that in the committee's charge, there was this charge to identify a cost-neutral solution. And we looked at a national report that identified many districts that had cost-neutral solutions. And they were in other parts of the country, which were much warmer, where they simply flipped elementary and middle. So the elementary school started at 7, and high school, I'm sorry. So the elementary started at 7:30 and the high school started at 9. Cost neutral, right? Because you had the same number of buses, you were just flipping the times. So this is a little more challenging once we had the principal, Ellie, in place that no elementary would start before 8. And again, that is certainly appropriate to the norms of our community, as well as, our climate and location.
I could, just add a couple of comments. Excuse me. As far as the traffic is concerned, on and off, I've dropped off my kids in high school, and the traffic is horrendous at 7:15 in the morning. So I would think it would be a lot better later, an hour later, but 7:15, you're backed up on both ends on Strawberry Hill. In addition, when we were talking, Frank, we were discussing whether it was cost neutral. Dr. Adamowski just mentioned that. I mean, our goal, especially myself as a board member, we wanted to get it under 700,000, and to be well under 700,000, under 500,000. I didn't think we'd actually be able to do that, but we were able to do that. And I want to commend the committee, because we really had a varied committee members that were really invested in this and really did the research, and the experts that we had as well. So I think this particular model works really best for our schools, especially having that high school time at 8:30 in the morning. And any of us that have high school kids, I mean, I know mine will just constantly hit the snooze button at 5:30. She's up every morning at 5:30 and hitting the snooze button so she can sleep an extra 5, 10, or 15 minutes. So I think we know the science, as Dr. Carr had mentioned, is there, and it backs up all of the research that's been done already for us. So I think we really need to look at this model, and all of the models that we looked at, this was really the most cost-effective and really made the most sense.
I have one more.
Julie?
Especially for our elementary schools that are starting on the later side, I guess that would be the groups 2 and 3, the 8:50 and 9:15. Do we also have childcare options in all of those elementary schools? Because I'm thinking if many jobs start at 8:30, 9 o'clock, it would almost be impossible to drop your child off.
Yeah, so this is why we need a year of planning,
Yeah.
because there has to be some shifting on that. We have some schools now that do have childcare before school, and we have others, the majority have it after school. There will have to be some adjustment in that, and again, that's why we need a year to plan.
Thank you.
Barbara?
Two facts that I didn't see in the report but thought I would share. One is accidents include sports accidents. Apparently, changing the time also lowers the number of sports injuries and improves sports achievement. Second of all, we didn't include the Milwaukee study, which not only compared socioeconomic poverty as an indicator, but also race, and it showed that in the minority school, there was an even greater achievement and attendance improvement. So just wanted to share that because it wasn't in the report.
Okay. I will turn now to Tanika Vellucci, social studies teacher at Brian McMahon High School, and Maureen Ireland, Norwalk High School math teacher. We'll discuss implementation.
Preparation for the school start time for the 2020-2021 school year would begin immediately following board approval. The planning and preparation will include collecting baseline data from this present school year, 2019-2020, and then comparing that data to next year's 2020-2021 after the start time has been implemented. The data that will be collected and analyzed would be tardies, absenteeism, GPAs, in-school suspension, bus ridership, class hour in sports, climate survey, rates, and credit loss due to absences. As a high school teacher and a teacher that had first period last year, first period classes, I noticed that students came to class late. They were also absent. I'd see them later on in the day and they say, oh, I missed the bus, and as a result, I missed your first period class. So I am a witness to the tardies. In addition, the planning, high schools will need to adjust their class schedules to the new start time. Athletic directors will need to communicate with other districts and coaches to adjust start times for their games. And parents may need to adjust their schedules as it relates to before and after school programs. Once this is approved, the district and schools will be able to plan for an easy transition into the 2020-2021 school year. Maureen?
So up here right now, which most of you have already seen and discussed, the $457,000 increase for transportation, along with the difference between how many buses we have using the 2019 versus the 2020 school year. But I think one of the biggest things is that our contract is up with First Student, and bids are going out in November. So this would be the right time so that we could utilize the information for the buses that we know that we're going to need to get the appropriate bids for the 2020-2021 school year. I think communication is probably one of the most important things to carry out because not only will we need to communicate with parents, staff members, but one of the biggest things that we thought in listening to students was we were going to have to communicate with community members that hire our high school students. I know students that work at the movie theater, and they are very specific in their times that they have for their shifts, but if we can send out information and get them on board with the idea that we're changing our school start time, that you employ our students, that maybe then they can be flexible and plan ahead too also. We talked about other employers like Stu Leonard's, and so that we can really just get everybody on top of everything. The other thing is that we would also be able to talk to some of the athletic premier teams in town, because right now they set their schedules, but they can plan for the 2020-2021 school year. So we think right here, these are a list of activities and things that we need to communicate with, not just our parents, but also active participants in our community. And I think it's
Thank you,
Dr.
Maureen.
Adamowski.
So, you know, we've been asked by a number of people, primarily the proponents of this, you know, why haven't you done this earlier, right? That was the response from some of the pediatricians, right? And then we've also had the question from some of the opponents of this. Gee, you did it this long, people survived somehow, why can't you do it longer? And I think this quote from Maya Angelou answers both concerns. Do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, do better. And I think the great contribution of this study committee is that we now know better, and now we have to do better. And it's with great enthusiasm that we recommend this report to you and urge you to adopt its recommendations.
Bruce?
Yeah, I want to make a comment and then announce a couple dates. First, a comment. The report was excellent. It's comprehensive, well-written. Every question that I had was answered. And that's good when you don't have any questions at the end. And I think he did an excellent job. And it was a very clear and concise presentation. So job well done. This is interesting because, you know, we've been talking for a couple of years now about everything we're doing to focus on the social and emotional health of children. Well, we just expanded that to social, emotional, and physical health of children, all of which are interrelated. So this is perfectly in tune with what we've been doing at different levels and at different times. And I think it's a very, very important step forward. We're making school with more electives, more opportunities, better start times. We're making schools, elementary, middle school, and high schools, a more enjoyable place to be in, a place where you have more opportunities, and you won't be sleep deprived if you're in high school. And that's a big change. We as adults, we know what it's like, and I'm sure high school students, they know probably better than we do. So job well done. I'd like to announce the goal is right now that we want to consider this 2 more times before it comes back to the full board in October. And from this meeting, the report will be discussed. Whatever loose ends are out there, whatever questions emerge, we will discuss it in 2 weeks from now at the Board of Ed's Curriculum Instruction Committee. I think it's, what's it, 3rd, so it would be September 17th in this room, in A300 at 5:30. If things come up and we have some specific questions, we may invite one or a few of you, or we may just ask Frank to get the information for us. After that, we plan to hold a public forum on October 7th, probably at 7 o'clock in the evening in this room. For the media that's here, I hope you could help publicize this forum. This is something that will affect not only every family with children in the school system, it will also affect families with children who will be in the school system. It will affect families that have family businesses in Norwalk that employ students from the school system. So this is a very big deal. It will affect the entire city. People are going to see school buses on the roads at different times than they're used to seeing. Everything is going to change for the better. So we're going to hold a public forum October 7th in this room. We'll have some brief presentations. I hope you all can make it. And there'll be a chance for the public to weigh in on the report, on certain aspects of the report. There's always something that everyone has missed that we didn't think of. And if the public gets a chance to weigh in, perhaps the final report that the board will vote on sometime probably at our second meeting in October, be tweaked a little bit, but we'll see. So September 17th, Curriculum Instruction Committee will consider the report further. Public forum October 7th. Public is, of course, invited to both. And finally, at our business meeting in the latter part of October, the third Tuesday in October, there will be public participation. At this point, we're dealing with the report. The research has been done, the evidence is here. I think the board is pretty much behind it. The cost came in lower than we thought. So we're really moving forward, and once again, thank you.
Okay, Julie.
Sorry, one, I guess, question that I don't need necessarily answered tonight, but would love at least some follow-up on at some point, and then one comment. So I know I asked earlier about meetings in the morning, and since currently the high schools start at 7:30, understood that meetings aren't happening before that. I would hope that this is something the high schools pay attention to, since if we move to an 8:30 start time, that doesn't all of a sudden shift other NHS, school governance councils or whatever, all of a sudden having those meetings, which would defeat the purpose of this if it's done to a great extent. And then my one question that I would hope for follow-up at some point and don't necessarily need it tonight is how was the shift to a potential permanent daylight savings, which comes up every year, twice a year around daylight savings times, how would that impact the later high school start times? I know there's been some journal articles and some information about that a permanent daylight savings might negate the impact of a later start time. So I just want to keep that on our radar as well as something to consider, but I don't necessarily need an answer on that tonight.
Okay, Barbara.
I want to circle back to the topic of childcare and how we plan before and after care for our families, as well as our vacation breaks. I know the March break was not very popular, and I think that we can be proactive in that school year to take the opportunity to work with our partners in the city, in the Parks Department, and with our nonprofit and for-profit partners through Norwalk Acts to create before and after care that can be both enriching, educational, and emotionally supportive. I would invite us to look at a model out of Brooklyn, where they have a JCC that comes in and provides these programs after school to provide dance and cooking and sports, but also trauma-informed care where it's needed, extra English help where it's needed. We could create a tiered level of services in that time space to serve our children at a sliding scale, and really it could be quite transformative for the community. So I hope that we can work on that together as a team this year and create that opportunity for our kids.
Okay. Any other board comments? If not, we thank you for everybody's hard work on this, and we will go to public comments, which are limited to the topic at hand tonight. Thank you, Warren. Our secretary and vice chair are not here. I guess I can handle it. I kind of forgotten that, so give me a second. Do this timer. Here we go. Okay, so please come up to the podium, introduce yourself, and your comments are limited to 3 minutes. Our first speaker is Aaron and Emily Hull.
Hi, respected members of the board, Superintendent Adamowski, and members of the committee. Thank you for hearing me tonight. With all due respect to Miss Angelou, who was one of my personal heroes, I don't feel that this is a silver bullet. I've often heard the following: if your friends do something silly, does that mean you have to do it too? My daughter is a sophomore at Center for Global Studies studying Chinese here in Norwalk. I'm starting my 22nd year as an educator at Greenwich High School, 17 years, 22 years as an educator, 17 years at Greenwich. I teach AP Government, AP Comparative Politics, Honors Civics, Honors American History, and am a UConn Early College Experience instructor. Late start times for us began a few years back for the 2017-2018 school year. We went from 7:30 to 2:15 to 8:30 to 3:15. The push was led by a factional, influential, elite group of parents that really turned the town inside out. We ended up with a lot of surveys during the time conducted, and several surveys that were reflective of what we had done, and very few of the results have been published. My perspective would be that if this was a success, they'd be shouting it from the mountaintops, and very little of that accountability ever came out in those surveys. In terms of the surveys, I'd like to direct us to page 9 here. Parent and guardian responses are for all kids K through 12. They're not broken out simply by the high schoolers, which the target is the focus. Also, in checking with my wife, no parents were ever asked about the loss of class time. And Norwalk is talking about going to 45 minutes rather than the 30 minutes that we lost. My students stay up later because they can't start their homework earlier. We have a Schoology platform. My submission times remain in the late at night or into the early morning. We've lost several fine educators to the challenges, but that pales to the lost class time that my students have experienced as a result of the challenges encountered. We created an opportunity block last year, and our headmaster would come on and say over the intercom, no formal instruction will occur past 2:45. In my estimation, that was a tacit admission that the process is not working. We're now releasing seniors. As of this year, all seniors are leaving at 2:45. All athletes that have not just games out of school, all athletes can be pulled for practices. Students who work can get released at 2:45, and students with childcare obligations based on the needs. And my perception is perhaps that's even more acute here. I'm not sure. What exactly does that do in terms of the real hours? The loss of class time for, granted.
You're limited to 3 minutes.
That's 3?
You've hit your 3 minutes, yes.
Emily can read for you, though, to finish the
Right.
statement.
We've lost 91 hours.
You're not the chair, Barbara.
12 days of instruction over this, 14 hours per each class, 2.5 hours per week. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dave Williams. Please introduce yourself and your address. I'll put my hand up at 2:30.
My name is Dave Williams, 2 Lilac Lane here in Norwalk. I'm looking at this in 2 ways. First, I want to thank everybody for all their hard work. It's certainly a well-documented a piece of work, and it certainly supports everything that you want to do. The one glaring piece that's missing is after-school sports programs that are not high school related. And why is that important to me? One, my daughter is a middle school player, field hockey and lacrosse. She'll be going into high school next year, which is when this will have impact. And second is I'm the president of Norwalk Bay Baseball here in town. I service 13 to 18-year-olds. So in the fall, I have 6 months of time where it's in the same time of school year. So in the fall, September, October, November, I have 100 kids that like to play baseball after school. In the spring, I have 200 kids that like to play April, May, June. So I have kids that are going to be affected across the board because with changes to all of our sports programming and moving it back an hour, my entire program is at the whim of the high school baseball seasons. So whether it's weather-related, whether it's schedule-related, or all the things that are going to impact based upon this change will now determine whether or not 100 children can play baseball in the fall and 200 can play baseball in the summer, spring, summer. So we talk about a lot of things. The gentleman over there said that this thing really covered our mental health, our other health, and physical. I disagree. We've taken out a lot of time in middle school for recess. We've taken out a lot of time for the physical activities. We don't have sports programs in the middle schools anymore. Stanford does, we don't. So that's where programs like mine come into play. So for a well-balanced child to be out there, you have to have the rest that you need. So we talk about circadian rhythms and our REM sleep, and that's all fine. We talk about health and wellness. We talk about nutrition. We talk about physical activity. I'm sure the list of pediatricians here, one of them I think is my daughter's, would agree that we need physical education. But by making this change, we now radically reduce the amount of playing time that we get on a playing field. And that's just me. That's just baseball. I don't know what's going to do to soccer. I don't know what it's going to do to field hockey, lacrosse, which my daughter plays both. I don't know what it's going to do to swimming. So somebody mentioned premier club teams or something like that. Miss Ironman did. Okay? My team went to the World Series this past season. We won at a very high level. We play premier baseball. In the Norwalk High School and in Brian McMahon High School, Mr. Matafari might not know the complete numbers, but I think I have over 80% of those two schools have played in my program. So now if we don't have middle school capability to get them to be able to practice and learn, where do we feed the high schools so that they can play periodically during the week? And if we follow the report where it's 25 to 30% of games could be impacted, maybe move them to Saturday games, more games on Saturdays, when do we play? As it is now in the fall, I can't, one moment please, as it is in the fall, I can't go to the McMahon side of town because I can't get on Roten and I can't get on Brian McMahon. I can play at City Hall, but it's grass, and when it rains, I don't have City Hall. Nathan Hale's there for me, but I share it with soccer. And already, my limitations are where I have to find times where I can practice and maybe play on a Saturday. So again, I'm just going to leave you with this. 100 kids in the fall, 200 kids in the spring, summer. Where do they play ball? How does their physical fitness fit into our extra 45 minutes of sleep? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mary Jordan.
Good evening. First, we wanted to, I'm Mary Jordan, representing the Norwalk Federation of Teachers, 9 Mott Avenue, Norwalk, Connecticut. Thank you to all of the members of the committee for this excellent report. We know how much work went into that, and we appreciate very much the work that was done. This is a health and welfare issue for adolescents. It's also an employment issue for the staff of the Norwalk Public Schools, both the certified and non-certified staff. We've already objected to the closed meetings and the secret process. We appreciate this very thorough report. It's really essential after what has gone. We will reserve most of our comments after we have absorbed the impact of the study. But we do have a lot of questions, and we see a lot of the good things that might come out of this. The careful implementation, the next steps are what we really care about. We see that this is going to happen. We see that it's very likely. We see the good things that could come out of it. We see a lot of very difficult days ahead too. Schedules, the loss of class time, the lack of ability for cross-district meetings in the elementary when we have some schools getting out at 3:10 and others getting out well after 4. How do those special educators in elementary school meet? We're going to have to have them pulled from the school day. There are a lot of other similar types of questions, but we wanted to make sure, most of all, to thank every member of the committee for the excellent work and for the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Joe Chanderko.
Good evening, Joe Chanderko, 9 Mott Avenue. Very similar along the lines of what Ms. Jordan said. I want to thank the committee for their work, though I have concerns both as a parent and a teacher. Some things that need to be pointed out, there was zero staff survey. No teachers, no paraprofessionals, no clerical staff, no custodians, nothing. 0 members of the Norwalk Public Schools at any level were surveyed to ask about their thoughts, their concerns, their needs. 0. When you look at some of the other numbers that are reported, less than 15% of our high school students responded into that information, and that's from your own report. 85% of the students are the silent majority, and their needs or their responses aren't noted. Other things to think of as we go through this, just staff who have multiple roles in other buildings, whether they be a coach or whether they are the provider of an after-school program, may not be able to do it now when their school is changing their dismissal time. So you're going to lose dedicated staff who have run programs, who have been that backbone and that cushion for students who need the extra time at other buildings. And other things as you move forward. Again, we've talked a little bit about this, but as someone who worked while also being a teacher, I know that some of our largest employers are not going to be easily able to shift a shift. You can't ask a private company to say, well, now you get out at 3:30 instead of 2:30. Can you please delay my start time an hour? Because someone needs to be there for whatever job it is. Whether it's at Stu Leonard's pushing carts or, maintaining the building, whatever it is, that job needs to be filled, and Stu's is going to fill it and not hold it necessarily for one of our high school students who had that job before. So those are some of the concerns I have. We have childcare issues. There will no longer be students who are met by their older brothers or sisters to pick up their brother or sister from the bus. It's a concern. Some of the areas that have the latest schools are the areas with the least amount of sidewalks and the least amount of streetlights. And now our students will be getting out at 4 o'clock, 3:50, 4:15. That's dangerous. I live in the Cranberry section of Norwalk. I'd be very, very hard pressed to allow my 5th grade daughter, when she gets to be in 5th grade, walk home from Cranberry at 4:15. That's a dangerous walk, even in the daytime. So I do appreciate the work that the committee did. I think there are some positives to it, but I think there are a lot more glaring holes that need to be addressed. And I'm concerned for our students as well as our teachers. We will lose valuable teachers. I believe the gentleman from Greenwich mentioned it. We will lose teachers who can no longer coach because they do not want to sit in traffic and do not want to be stuck at 4 o'clock on what is I-95's gridlock. So I think there needs to be some adjustments and some really, really dedicated look at our staff and what some of their responses are and what some of their responsibilities are as we balance that with our students. Our students come first, but there are over 1,100 employees from teachers and aides that also need to have some of that balance, some of that say. So I hope you reconsider and think.
That concludes public comments unless there's anyone else. Okay. A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Mr. Lyons, Ms. Keys, all in favor? And at 8:33.